Damn, you're good looking. It's like I'm staring into the face of God. So, you guys were my first higher power, right? So my name is Joe, and I am an alcoholic. A real alcoholic, as described in the book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Someone who suffers from grave emotional and mental disorders. My life was a lot like a war early on, and so I'm going to try to get through all this pretty quick. My whole story was written pretty much right here on this reservation, and there was never a time in my life where alcohol was not a large part of my life from birth. My mother, I was told, drank my entire pregnancy with me, and she drank after I was born, of course, and she died in an alcohol-related car accident when I was 18 months old. She was driving, had a carload of friends. They crossed the yellow line and crashed into an elderly lady and killed everybody in that car. In that car wreck. So from that time on, I was left with my father, and we lived right in the middle of this little village, which was quite a bit smaller then. There was just like 3 rows of houses maybe, and our house was kind of right in the middle. It was like the hub. A lot of people were coming in and out all the time. It was all men that lived in that house. I think there was 3 of my uncles and my grandfather, my dad, and me. So everybody was an alcoholic, and my dad loved to partake in extracurricular chemical activities. And so I learned a lot about what that life looks like early on, right? You learn how a kid gets treated in a house like that, and you learned how women get treated in a house like that, and there was a lot of violence, and I would get visitation with my grandfather, who a lot of you probably knew. His name was Daryl Bassford. I will blow his anonymity because he's in the big meeting in the sky. And he was early in recovery at that time. I think it was in 1977. I think right out front from this building, in the Swinomish Channel. He was drinking one night and had the bright idea that he was going to sink a Coast Guard cutter that was out here. And they had a homemade cannon. My grandpa liked making cannons. He was a tugboat captain, so he had 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. In his free time, he liked tinkering with guns and cannons, and he had a few cannons. This particular cannon they mounted to the bow of his best friend's purseine boat, and they had an argument with these coasties over at the lighthouse bar, and they decided they were going to sink their boat. Didn't work out, luckily, but due to those choices, he got to spend some time in federal prison and found some sobriety. So I was introduced to you at a very young age. I would, spend time with my grandfather when he was not on the boat, and we would go to the old Alano Club up by the post office in Mount Vernon. We spent a lot of time there, and other meetings. But, I was the little kid in the back of the room that was annoying everybody that was trying to talk. I was banging pool balls in the back, and I was squirting people with a squirt gun, and, you guys tolerated me. You loved me. And I really enjoyed growing up in that Alano Club. Met a lot of people and still have a lot of family from that time in the mid '80s, and none of that makes me an alcoholic. I got to write my own story, and at a very young age, I started. I probably waited until I was like 9, maybe, to start really drinking and smoking cigarettes, smoking weed, and I was a good kid, but I always kind of was getting in trouble for just dumb stuff. I was always doing something. There was always something going on, and with a grandpa like mine, he always he set me up really good for having fun and getting in trouble. He built me my first potato gun. I was like 12. Perfect age to have a potato gun. But it gave me a pellet gun, and I caused a lot. I was just nuisance stuff. But the alcohol really started playing a role in my life at about 13 years old. I really started hanging out with some older people and getting into a lot of trouble here. I picked up my first felonies when I was 13, and had to go to treatment. I chose to go to treatment to stay out of youth prison. Actually, they were going to send me to juvie, but there was three felonies that were part of that, and so my very first charges, I would have went to a juvenile prison. And as a part of that deferral program, I had to go to treatment, and I became a ward of the Swinomish Court, like immediately. This is like right out the gate. And so I had to check in with the court constantly, and there was a lot of stuff. Like I went through treatment programs, and I couldn't pass because I was not only addicted to alcohol, I really like girls, and I'd go to these treatment facilities, and there was always girls, and I'd get in trouble for that everywhere I went. I ended up doing more time in treatment than I would have if I would have just went to prison, because I couldn't figure out how to leave the girls alone, and I realized at that time that I was never going to get out of the system if I didn't just start playing by the rules. And so I tried to get clean and sober. Actually, I was introduced to Antabuse during that time period too, and that was pretty fun time. It was in between two treatment facilities. I got kicked out of one, and I had to wait for a bed date in another, and it was like a 2-week period of time where I was home, and they were giving me Antabuse, and of course I didn't quit drinking, and so I had to learn to drink through a lot of adversity, right? And if you're going to do it, right, half measures availed us nothing. So, but I quickly realized this was not going to stop if I didn't just start playing by the rules, and so I did. I started going to meetings. I was introduced to a lot of the people that are really vital in my sobriety today. At a very young age, I had fun doing meetings. It was reminiscent of when I was younger. Obviously it was only a few years prior. So I made it like 2 years until I was able to get the court system off my back when I was 18, and I just completely, how they say that, your alcoholism never gets better, it always gets worse, and it was instantly worse. It was like from the get-go, as my sponsor would say, I was going full tilt boogie, and so about 10 minutes after I turned 18, I picked up, some charges. I got a DUI and spent some time in the Skagit County Jail, and I was introduced to another person that is now in the meeting, the big meeting in the sky, that I'd like to pay respects to, and that's Roger M. He was my first counselor as an adult, and I love that man. He's a legend here in La Conner. He's a La Conner guy, and man, he really touched me. And he was my counselor, because obviously I couldn't figure it out. He was my counselor until I got clean and sober like 5 years later, because I couldn't get out of that program that was supposed to be like 2 years. Because I kept getting DUIs and doing all that stuff, right? And along the way, I had kids. About 3 weeks after I turned 18 years old, my first son was born. And that was when I had my very first spiritual awakening, I would say. The very first time that I felt some sort of love in my life. I knew my grandfather loved me, and I knew that my dad loved me, but it was the first time that my heart just literally swelled, where I really felt like it was a spiritual experience. And when that little boy was born, I made him all the promises. I was not going to be my father. I was not going to drag him into my childhood. I was going to, coach soccer and Little League and go to parent-teacher conferences and stuff that, my dad never did. We got home, and 2 days later, and all that was out the door. I went right back into doing what I was doing. Drug my child right into my childhood, and I carried a lot of guilt for that for a lot of years. I loved his mother. I freaking loved her, man. We had known each other our whole lives, and our dads partied together, and she was my soulmate. And we did a lot of bad things to each other over the years. And a couple years later, had another son. And then, I'm like 20 when my second son shows up, and things are really, really bad at home, man. I mean, it's really dark, and a lot of bad things are starting to happen in my life. Kind of outside of my control, right? Like my dad's like really sick, and other people are kind of dying, and things are getting dark, right? And there came a point when I was 21. My dad was 46. So this was the thing about this disease. Like, I still think of myself as a younger person. I know I'm like middle age. I'm 45 years old. My dad was 46 years old, and he had literally drank himself to the point where everything was shutting down. He was my age, and his entire body just shut down. He had another family in Tulalip, on the Tulalip Reservation, and so I had 3 brothers and a sister down there, and I'm the oldest. I was left with the decision to take my dad off life support, and at that time, with my siblings, they were totally against it, but my dad had shared his views on that with me throughout my growing up, and he never wanted to live in a situation where he was basically a vegetable, and so it was. I carried out his wishes and took him off life support. And when I did that, my siblings hated me. They really just cut me off, and I carried a lot of guilt for that. When my dad died, a piece of me died with him. And so I used a lot more over that, right? Because we medicate ourselves. We use alcohol and other substances as medicine, right? And it was still working, sort of, at that point for me. But it wasn't long after that. I was getting to where alcohol was no longer doing what I needed it to do. And of course, I was consuming more. I was consuming other substances at this time, and a lot of them. But the one thing about me, and I know I'm not unusual in this, but alcohol was the one thing that I always used. Alcohol was the one thing that was part of my life from the time I woke up until the time I went down. There was other substances that made appearances, but most of the time that was just so I could drink, more. Alcohol was the one thing I wanted more of all the time. And, when it went from drinking the night away to drinking weeks away, that my girl wasn't happy, and she left. She told me one night, I came home from work, I was still doing construction work at this time, and she tells me I'm leaving and I'm taking the boys. I'm gonna go live with my dad and my brother. And it still hurts me when I think about this now. I got off work at 3 o'clock that day, and I got home at midnight, and that was about par, and I was crawling into bed, and she already had her mind made up, right? She looks me right in the face, and she tells me this stuff, and I can remember not feeling a damn thing. A lot of people would try to change to keep their family, and I remember just being dead inside, where I just was like, everyone else leaves, and my family had become baggage. They were holding me back, right? She tells me she's leaving, and I say, okay. I get back up, I put my pants back on, I made a couple phone calls, and I got right back on the horse, and I left. We were only separated for about 9 months. And in that time period, I picked up a vehicular assault charge. Would have been my third DUI in 3 years. Almost killed my best friend. From the time she left, I did not breathe another sober breath. In that 9 months, I consumed everything that I had, that we had. I just literally drank and smoked it all, honestly, I'll be honest. But 9 months later, she reaches out to me. She wanted to try to put our family back together again. She came home, and she stayed the night with me, and we talked out this whole plan, literally talked the whole night. And this is what we're going to do. We're going to leave Swinomish. I'm going to get sober. I'm going to get my job back. I'm going to get back in the union. We're going to build that life that we always dreamed of for our kids. And so the next day, I'm fishing at this time. The next day's opening day for Humpies. So all the stuff went out the window. I jumped right back on the boat, and I went back doing what I do, and she was going out that night, and she went partying with some girlfriends, and those ladies got into a car wreck that night, and she died in that car wreck. It was 3 days after my younger boy's 4th birthday, and so my kids now are literally right in the same situation that I grew up in, right? They're stuck with a dad that cannot figure out how to breathe a sober breath, right? I thought I was raised by wolves, being in the household that I was in, and I believe I was worse than my uncles and my dad were. My dad raised me to live this life, and he did a good job. So I did what I should do at that point. I stayed sober long enough to take care of her funeral arrangements, and then I dropped off my kids with their grandfather, and I left. And I didn't look back. I drank, and I drank, and I drank for the end. When that woman died, a large piece of me died with her. And but I was at that point. That's how they talk about it, that's written about in A Vision for You, where I was at that point already where I couldn't imagine life with alcohol or without it, right? It just wasn't doing what I needed it to do. I remember I would sell something. I would sell a car. Like I had amassed a bunch of stuff. I was good at making money, and I would sell something, and I'd have a pile of drugs, and I'd have a pile of alcohol, and I would sit and I would drink, and I'd watch people drink with me and drink all my beer and do all my drugs, and then they would, and I couldn't feel a damn thing, right? It was just no longer working. And I used for 6 months straight, drank constantly. On this little reservation, my kids were literally a quarter of a mile down the road, on the main road. There's a little white house right in the middle. They were there. I dropped them off, and they didn't see me. I was here drinking the whole entire time. Nobody saw me for like 6 months. And after that 6 months, I was convicted of that vehicular assault charge. And I was looking at doing a substantial amount of time in prison. And so I was trying to get clean and sober, and I wanted to get my kids back in my life, and I wanted to get a job, and I was hoping that I could muster up enough to do the right thing. And the hard thing about me in that situation is I could not think of you. For some reason, it never even crossed my mind to reach out to Alcoholics Anonymous. It never even broke the doorway, right? And I remember I tried to quit drinking. I had a bunch of warrants here on reservation, which is different, right? There's a court system and a police here, and then all my charges were county. But here, I had a bunch of warrants. I could no longer go to my house because every time I went to my house, I was getting picked up where I was running from the cops. So I was just up the road at one of my best friend's house. He let me try to detox in his game room. He says, stay away from my kids' rooms, but you can stay in the game room. And I tried to white knuckle it. And I had been going hard for I don't know how many years. It would probably been 8 years before I had any type of sobriety. And you know what that looks like. It was messy. It was dark. There's about 3-4 days of a really bad physical detox, and then he just kept the orange juice flowing. Little did he know, he probably would have helped out, give me a beer or two every now and then, but we got through it. We lived. I made it. I'm still here today. I had just gotten sentenced for that vehicular assault charge, and I pled guilty to that charge to get rid of the DUI. So I took the felony to get rid of the DUI because the DUI was going to give me 5 years in prison. And so I was looking at 1 year, and they said I could get work release if I could get a job. And so I was thinking, I can do this. I made it 6 days. 6 days was all I could do. I had one friend that was calling. He was over at the LaConner Pub. He kept calling, man, just come on over. I'll get you a drink, man. It'll all be good. It'll be good. It'll be all right. We'll take it easy. As if I don't know, right? They say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Well, for me, I knew exactly what was going to frickin' happen. But I'm going to do it anyway, right? And I know that I'm not unusual in that because we all know what it's going to look like. We're going to break out in handcuffs, end up in a hospital strapped to a bed, or I'm going to end up they got a drunk tank over in this little building at the end of the building, and I woke up in there routinely stuck to that floor, and this is part of the gig, right? So I'll go have a drink, right? And I'm dating this girl at the time, kind of, sort of, she was a damn good Al-Anon. She jumped on that train right at the worst frickin' time, and she's a really nice, really, really wonderful woman. And she brought me over to the pub, dropped me off, gave me a kiss, said she was going to go out and party with her girlfriends or something, and I got out of that car, and I don't remember a damn thing after that. I woke up 6 weeks later in Harborview. I had been in a coma, And my uncle was at my bedside with a team of surgeons, and they were bringing me out of this medically induced coma. And they're explaining to me that I had gotten drunk and I got cut off at the pub that night, and I decided to walk over the arches of the Rainbow Bridge, the bridge that you came across to get here. And I made it about 70 feet up those arches, and I fell off. And this was in late February. It was freezing out. It was February 21st, 2004. I fell 70 feet to the asphalt below, and I landed on my feet. And I was just talking about this in Marla, how sometimes, like, I don't remember it, but sometimes when I'm dreaming, I'll get small glimpses, just like a little blip. You know how when you wake up sometimes and you feel like you've been falling? I get that, and I'm scared to death because I think I'm getting little memories of what's going on. Like, my brain's just giving me little flashes. But sometimes I remember hanging from that steel from my fingertips, and my aunt talks about this, how when they got me to the hospital, my fingertips were just black from holding onto that steel. Like, I held on as long as I could before I fell off. But when I came to, these surgeons were telling me that there wasn't anything that they could have done that would have saved my life. The injuries that I sustained that night, people don't live through that. You know, they're giving me the odds. You know, when you fall from 10 feet, there's a certain percentage that you're going to live or die. And when you fall from 20, 30, 40, and you fall from 50 feet, there's no real statistic, you know. And they say you fell from 70 feet. And when I hit the ground, my femurs exited out, my backside, crushed my pelvis, lower 3 ribs on either side, first 4 vertebrae in my spine. All that was crushed. Torn colon, torn heart cavity, torn diaphragm, punctured lungs. You know, when I came to, I can remember just being angry. Like, I had buried so many people that I just freaking loved, man, that were just amazing human beings, and I thought I was a piece of shit. You know, why did God keep me? Why am I here? Why do I have to live through this, right? And so here's the amazing part of this story, right? I'm looking at this rehabilitation, like they're trying to train me to basically they told me that they didn't know if I was ever going to walk again. You're never going to be a fisherman. You're never going to be a construction worker. So they want to do this occupational therapy with me so I can learn how to live a different way. And I wasn't having it. I was 24 years old, and I just still was pretty convinced that I'm bulletproof. I lived through that. What's going to stop me, right? And so it wasn't long, man. I get that girl that dropped me off. She had just started dating me, man. She drove down to that hospital every day. She worked here in Mount Vernon. She drove to Harborview every day to see me and sit with my family. 6 weeks. Numerous times they told my family he's a very small chance that he's gonna live through this surgery, like 5-10% chance that he's gonna live through this surgery. And they just said he's still alive. Keep going. And they put me back together again. And when it came time for me to go home, I needed a ton of care. And my family, they wouldn't take me home. None of them. I have a huge family. None of them wanted to take care of me. I had burned those bridges. But she did. She took me home to her little girl. She had a 3-year-old daughter. Brought me home to her little apartment that was in the same complex where I'd go to get drugs a lot of nights. She nursed me back to health. She allowed me to move my boys in with her. And I was told, so Before the accident, I got sentenced. 2 weeks after the accident took place, I was supposed to check into jail for a year-long commit. I was in a coma for 6 weeks. Timelines don't match up. I did not check into jail. Shortly after I got released from the hospital, I got charged with an escape in the first degree. On top of that already lengthy record, that was looking like a substantial amount. It was a minimum, I think, of 5 years in prison. And so this is where God steps in again, right? There's no way I should have lived through that fall. And immediately, everywhere, there's God, I swear. Like, in the prosecutor's office, a member of Alcoholics Anonymous that knew me from a young child. She found a way to keep me, for me to serve my sentence, right? It was just like, here, we'll put him on an anklet. He physically can't go to jail. It's not like it was a freeway chase. I wasn't going to run from anybody. I was bedridden, and so they put an anklet on me, and then they said, okay, you have to go and do an alcohol evaluation, and you have to abide by those treatment recommendations or whatever. And I've told this story a few times, and it's really unique tonight because the guy's in the room. But I got wheeled into this man's office, and you know how as alcoholics, we have a script in our head. We know what we say when it's time to do that alcohol evaluation, right? I mean, you know what you I had it all figured out. I walked in and I sat down and that man, I sat down in his office, and what came out pretty much was, I'm an alcoholic and I need help. And that wasn't part of the script. And we got to work. I didn't have to go to prison that day. I did what we decided I was going to do for my treatment, and I was introduced to so many amazing people. Another person that's in the big meeting in the sky, right? Dean Frizzell. Dean was one of my frickin' angels, man. I was in his very first class, and I just gave him so much shit, and he'd just look at me, just keep coming back, buddy. And I remember when we were talking about a higher power in one of the classes, and he says, buddy, if anyone should have a higher power, it should be you, right? He's like, I know your story. And I just gave him, man, I just love that guy. We had so much fun. But what happened was I got introduced to my family, right? My family wouldn't take me, my blood family wouldn't take me home and put me back together. But when I walked into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I met my family, right? I mean, a lot of these people that are sitting right up front right now were at the very first meeting that I walked into, and I didn't know it right then, but we were going to be blood, right? I met my first sponsor, and I didn't pick up a sponsor right off the bat. I'm kind of a slow learner, but when I did, he put me to work immediately, and that was the one single thing that probably saved my life, was getting me connected to you, right? Because I would come and sit in the back of the room and leave as soon as I could. He gave me the key to that building, and he said, okay, you're going to open up, you're going to make coffee, you're going to find somebody to chair the meeting, or you're going to chair the meeting. And that held me accountable, right? Right off the bat, that held me accountable. And that was how I got my first service position with that. I remember sitting in the back by the fire extinguisher right at the front door. And they were doing elections. And Marla nominated me to be, I think it was the GSR, or alt-dear GSR, or something crazy like that. And I was just like, no, trying to stumble in the back, and they're like, well, there's a requirement for time, and we'll waive that, and they put me to work, right? And that was it. Everywhere I went at that point, I was a pariah, right? I mean, all of my friends, the guys that I fished with, the guys that I ran with, they had gutted my house, taken anything that was worth any money, and they had run. They didn't want me. They took my guns. They took my bikes. They took everything, and they didn't want anything to do with me. And these are the guys that were my bros, my brothers, right? So then I go to this place, and they wanted to keep me, right? They didn't. My bros didn't want me. They took my shit, and they left. And these people kept saying, keep coming back. And they gave me a hug, and they said, welcome. Okay, now let's go pick up cigarette butts, and things like that. I got to be a butt ranger right off the bat. But the thing is, I wasn't doing it on my own. It was all just kind of, we're joking around, having fun out, doing the thing, and it's a lot like what's talked about in A Vision for You, when you're going to meet, the family, the people that you're going to walk with shoulder to shoulder, right? And that started very early on for me. Having service positions with that group took me up to, I was going to, district and area level functions and just getting introduced to the whole system. And I couldn't stand it, but I loved the car rides. Rob and I had some good conversations. Frank, we had some good meetings on those car rides. And it was a lot of going to different meetings that were struggling. It was like a small group of folks that were just like running around. We were trying to do everything, right? And, I still hadn't made the conscious decision that I was done, right? Like the alcohol was the only thing that was ever constant in my life. I lost everybody that meant anything to me, and the people that loved me were worse off for doing so. And I really struggled, with putting both feet in the door. I was having fun, but I still hadn't done the steps, and I was running around sharing something that I really didn't have. I was doing panels and detoxes, and so about 3 years into it, one of my close friends, a guy I grew up with, a guy I ran with, a guy I did a lot of drinking with, he was reaching out to me, and I didn't do what I was supposed to do. I didn't extend my hand. The hand of Alcoholics Anonymous was not there when it should have been for him. I was too chicken shit. I was scared. I didn't want to risk my sobriety for his. I told him he couldn't bullshit a bullshitter when he said he wanted to get sober. And we kind of had a little bit of a laugh, and he said, whatever, I'll see you, And a couple weeks later, I found out that he'd hung himself on Thanksgiving. He couldn't get it. And that just about did me in, Spiritually, that was a serious hit for me. And I just about checked out. I remember talking to Rob, my first sponsor, about that. And I didn't want to drink anymore. I knew I did not want to drink. It wasn't working anyway. But life just wasn't working for me. I wasn't okay with me yet because I hadn't done the work, right? I'd written numerous 4 steps. People talk about 4 steps being the hard part. It was all replaying in my head constantly anyway. So writing the 4 steps was not a problem. I could not trust you with that. I wouldn't give that to anybody. And that was what was killing me, right? But Rob and I talked about what I was going to do, and what came out of that was I was going to come back home. I was living in Mount Vernon, and I was going to come back here to the reservation, and I was going to start bringing it back to my people. I was going to be here. I was going to be accountable. And I didn't know any indigenous folks, any Indians here that were sober, really, that were doing this. Some people I knew that were going to church. I was not going to do that. That was the one thing. I mean, I'd read the steps like, yeah, I can do that. I'm not fucking doing that. I'll do that one. Church wasn't on there, and I sure as hell wasn't going to church. But what happened was I met a couple Indians with some serious sobriety, and I started kind of following them around, and what happened was, what that looks like for me is I can make coffee, I can find a room to have a meeting, I can set up chairs, I can do that type of work. So that's what we did, Rob and I found a room. We started a meeting. We started another meeting, another one that you guys might know, No Reservations. That came out of that time period. That was... but I was just, at that point, I just was on fire with this thing. I was going to the jails, I was doing the institutions, and I was facilitating meetings, and I was just falling in love with this group, this fellowship, and I married that gal right around that time period. You know what God does for a guy that doesn't know how to treat a woman. I got married and she begged me to have another kid, and we ended up having twin daughters. God, it's the most amazing thing that ever happened to me, the most amazing thing that happened to my entire family. I was been able to raise my children, in this fellowship. They love me. They love their father. I've sponsored a slew of people. I have a bunch of grand sponsees, great grand sponsees, and I'm watching my community just grow. I can't hardly go anywhere in Western Washington, at least, without somebody knowing me from No Reservations. It's like the community is just humongous, right? And I used to run around thinking I was just always alone, like I'm different. So I've been sober now for a little over 20 years, and I've experienced a lot of different ups and downs, right? Like I recovered physically better than anyone ever thought I was gonna. I went right back to doing construction work. I went right back to crabbing. I built my own crab boat in my first year of recovery, pretty much one-handed. And the people that knew me then, when I walked into that room, my first meeting, I weighed 120 pounds. I had a turtle shell on because my back was still recovering. I didn't have use of my right hand, and I was pretty well sucked up, man. And what I got from these rooms was just that mustard seed of hope, right? That little bit of hope that things can be better, and I took that, and it just snowballed and snowballed, right? I became a commercial diver. I remember Harborview, they had doctors from the university that were part of the back surgery, and they would call periodically to see how I was recovering. And this one time I'm telling them, oh yeah, I just got certified for commercial diving, and I built my own crab boat. I've been kind of finishing concrete on the side, just for a little extra money to support my family. And they're like, I think we got the wrong guy. And I'm like, no, you got the right guy. But what it is when you're living this program, it just feels like, for me, it just felt like I had a new lease on life. I had another shot at life, right? And when Rob and I had made that decision that I was going to bring it back here, that I was going to step through that door, and I was not going to look back, right? I was going to step through with both feet, and I was not going to look back. And what I did was I just took every bit that I could And I made an impact wherever I could. If I could set up a chair, I'd set up a chair. If I could make a pot of coffee, I made a pot of coffee. If somebody needed to get to a meeting, whether they wanted to or not, a lot of times they'd end up in my truck and come to in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd have one of my buddies would be walking through the res. He might be stumbling, looking for some extra cash. And I'd be like, yeah, get on, let's go. Pretty soon they'd just point at me like, I'm not getting on that truck. The thing is some of those guys stuck, man. There's a couple of them that are still doing it, man. They haven't had maybe continuous sobriety, but they've had glimpses of what it can look like, right? Our sobriety can be just the most plain Jane sobriety, but if you are willing to work for it and you are willing to do the service work and sit down with another newcomer when they need help, and you're willing to watch that light come back on in their eyes, we can have that lobster dinner, right? We can live a life that we never dreamed. And for me, that was it, right? I'd put my kids all the way through school, had built this small fishing fleet. I own a house. There's certain things that I just never thought from where I come from. My people die in the gutter and they die in institutions. That's flat out it. And I have lived a life that a lot of days just don't feel like I deserve. But no matter what, Rob told me this early on. Rob was my first sponsor, and he sponsored me for about 3-4 years maybe. But he taught me so much in that time period that never went away, right? Like, you never say no to a reasonable request of this program, right? I don't have it in me today. Even if I could, I still won't tell you no matter what. It's just like, it's a program. Whatever, I'll be there. And what that's given me, even if I've given up a little bit of time with my family, it's fed my spirit so much more, right? Like when I sit here and I look out into this crowd, I literally feel the hand of God. I feel like I'm the guy that has died and been touched by God and came out with a completely different outlook on life. Here we are, 20 years in. My wife and I had kind of grown apart, and we're divorced now, but we've done that amicably. Our daughters are 14 years old, and they still love their daddy. They still love their mom, and we work out everything we can, and I take care of her like she's my family. She is my family. She saved my life. Just because we don't live together anymore doesn't mean I don't have to, take care of her. And, I've been going through one of the roughest patches, I think, through that separation and this little business venture I took on. I've been going through some pretty hard times. But what I've learned, again, just what I'm relearning, is when things get tough, there's always opportunity to be of service, right? There's always somebody that is looking, and if you're willing to be that person to sit down with another struggling alcoholic and do what needs to be done, or sit up front and speak. Ed asked me. I want to say thanks to Ed for asking me and giving me the opportunity to be of service tonight, because when he asked me, I was in my head, I'm thinking, Ed, have you seen my life today? Sometimes it just feels like everything is falling apart. But that all has to do with perspective, right? Have I prayed today? Have I prayed in the last hour sometimes? Have I prayed before I got to the podium? Because some days I feel like I'm losing everything. But when I got here, I literally had nothing. I have a family that's bigger than I could ever imagine, and a family that continually keeps putting out. You know, you want to talk about gratitude as a gratitude banquet. What do I have gratitude for today? I have gratitude for every single one of you. You know, when times get tough, you know, the people in Alcoholics Anonymous always show up no matter what. You know, I made it to the meeting that I made it to because of one of the gals that met me when I was 5 years old, my very first meeting, right? She kept bugging me. She was a friend of my grandfather's and wouldn't take no for an answer until I went to a meeting with her. And she is still a close member of my family today, right? Like, I have contact with her on a regular basis, and you know, she's known me since I was like 4 years old. You know, some of the family in this room have shown up just way more than my blood would show up, and that to me is just irreplaceable, right? Like this past week, my son got very ill. My oldest son got very ill, almost died. He's in ICU right now. But when things get tough for me, I'm like laser focused. I don't pay attention to anything else. It's like, what's the next thing? You know, I knuckle down. I don't worry about the emotions much. I just get straight into work. And with my son, it was like that. It was instantly, it's like, okay, doc, what are we doing? You know, and it was figuring out a treatment plan for my son immediately. Sometimes I forget to call my family. Sometimes I forget to eat. Sometimes I forget to drink water. You know, and what happened was Alcoholics Anonymous just wrapped their arms around me. You know, when you said that you would love me until I could love myself, it sounded so fucking tacky in the beginning, right? When you're brand new here and you hear stuff like that, it's like, what the fuck ever? You know, and I was told not to say that word up here out of respect for the very thing that's saving my life, but that is literally how I felt. And I got to feel every bit of that this week, right? People just reaching out, have you eaten? You know, do you need anything? I will show up. And people showed up and took care of me when I was taking care of my son. And, you know, he's going to be okay. He's got a long road to recovery, but he's going to be okay. He's probably going to make a full recovery. And what I'm learning over and over again is that if I take care of you, God will take care of me. I will be taken care of. My needs will always be met. You know, when I feel like I can't make my mortgage payment, or I don't know where I'm going to make, you know, money for whatever I need. You know, I've had these financial insecurities so many times, right? It's written out in the promises. When you're not in the right mindset, if you haven't prayed, if you don't have that spiritual connection, right? It's scary. Now I just know I'll be taken care of. If I lose my house, I'll be taken care of. If I lose my business, I'll still be taken care of. Whatever happens is what was supposed to happen. You know, whatever I want, if I got what I wanted, man, I would have had a nice boat and a beautiful woman, and you wouldn't have been part of that story. You know? I mean, that was literally it. If I had a new engine for my boat, some brand new crab gear, and a beautiful woman to ride by me, I would have been happy. You know, and look what I got, right? When you do the work, you get to live in color. You know, everything doesn't have to be black and white anymore. I get to look out the window and I get to see the sunrise and be able to admire every bit of it. You know, we know what 3 o'clock in the morning looks like. You know, we know what that loneliness feels like. And today you don't have to feel that. If you're new in these rooms, trust me, you don't ever have to live that way again. So, in closing, I would just like to read a part, like one of my favorite parts in the Big Book, that, my story kind of went through. The part of the Big Book that really, really grabbed me. And again, it's from A Vision for You. He will presently try the old game again, for he isn't happy about his sobriety. He cannot picture life without alcohol. Someday he will be unable to imagine life either with or without it. Then he will know the loneliness which few do. He will be at the jumping off place. He will wish for the end. We have shown how we got out from under. You say, yes, I'm willing, but am I to be consigned to a life where it shall be stupid, boring, and glum, like the righteous people I see? I know I must get along without liquor, but how can I? Have you a sufficient substitute? Yes, there is a substitute, and it's vastly more than that. It is a fellowship in Alcoholics Anonymous. There you will find release from care, boredom, and worry. Your imagination will be fired. Life will mean something at last. The most satisfactory years of your existence lie ahead. That is the sentence that meant a world to me in the beginning, because I didn't know what that meant. I thought my life was just going to be miserable until I died, hopefully before I was 30, Thus, we find the fellowship, and so will you. How is that to come about, you ask? Where am I supposed to find these people? You're going to meet these new friends in your own community. Near you, alcoholics are dying hopelessly, like people in a sinking ship. If you live in a large place, there are hundreds, high and low, rich and poor. These are the future fellows of Alcoholics Anonymous. Among them, you will make lifelong friends. You will be bound to them with new and wonderful ties, for you will escape disaster together, and you will commence shoulder to shoulder in your common journey. Then you will know what it means to give yourself that others may survive and rediscover life. You will learn the full meaning of love thy neighbor as thyself. And for me, that reading felt exactly like my life. I couldn't imagine life with or without alcohol, but you showed me how to live, and you showed me how to be a productive member of society. You showed me how to be of service, and you showed me how to love myself. For that, I'll be eternally grateful. Thank you for allowing me to be of service.